Welcome back, Flyers Nitty Gritty fans, to Getting Gritty with It Breaking News with my co-host, my partner in crime, Vasili Gianarakos. Vasili, how are you doing?
I'm doing really well with the news that's hit us here. A little bit of impromptu news. I don't think anybody thought that, on a Sunday morning we were going to get this breaking news about Matvei Michkov, but here we are. Personally, me, when I heard the news, I was in church. I was not really prepared, but
Yep.
I'm happy to get the news as all, people following the Flyers and media covering the team are.
Yeah, and just a little background. This is June 23rd, and shout out to Nasty Knuckles on this for retweeting the Flyers history with June 23rd. So in 2011, the Flyers traded Richards and Carter on June 23rd. On June 23rd, 2012, they traded JVR for Luke Shen. On June 23rd, 2014, they traded Scott Hartnell. And on June 23rd, 2017, they traded Braden Shen. So this organization has a history of pulling the trigger just around this date on some big news. Now, having said that, the Flyers did not officially announce this, but barring all of the information that has come out leading up to this point, the statements from Medvedev, the images of Michkov wearing clothing online, the speculation has been stirring around. I'll give a shout out to PHLY, who kind of pointed out Danny Briere's face as he was asked about Michkov coming over, and he's got this kind of hidden smug little smile that he's displaying. And barring the news that we're hearing today, and shout out to Hockey News Hub for kind of breaking this wide open, at least here in North America, and kind of getting the party started. It appears that Matvei Michkov has come to an agreement with SKA St. Petersburg about terminating his contract with the KHL and is inbound to sign his ELC with the Philadelphia Flyers. From what we understand, and again, we can give a shout out to multiple Philadelphia beat writers, Kevin Kurz, Charlie O'Connor, Anthony Sanfilippo, most of the people reporting this. It seems to be that a deal is in place. The ELC is already drafted up. From what we understand, I was listening to Anthony Sanfilippo. I do trust his word on this, that they see zero issue with this contract being signed. We're hearing news from Hockey News Hub. He's saying it's not official because the Flyers haven't made it official, but that he has accepted his ELC contract. We'll talk a little bit about those terms, about what they probably are, but we do suspect it to be a 3-year ELC, so a standard top of the draft ELC will probably be put in place here. But it appears that Matvei Michkov will be starting his NHL career this upcoming season, will be over here within, let's just say, anywhere between a week to 3 weeks. Again, a shout out to Anthony Sanfilippo. He was told internally that he will not be at development camp, which does start the July 4th kind of week. I think it's July 2nd to the July 6th. They're saying he won't make it over in time for that. I'm a little skeptical, but I do kind of trust that that is probably true. But it appears that Matvei Michkov is coming here. Vasili, just your immediate thoughts. We have obviously topics to talk about, but how are you feeling right now that this kind of broke? And obviously incredibly distracting day for both of us. I think we were both doing very different things today, expected kind of a day off. And as soon as the news broke, my entire day just changed.
Yeah, same here. I mean, I really wasn't expecting it to happen, but first of all, you listing out like all the big moves the Flyers have made on June 23rd kind of makes me feel like, hey, maybe we should have like had this
Right.
pointed out and kind of
Fool
known that maybe
me
something was,
twice. Shame
yeah,
on me.
exactly. But just initially, right, at least my thoughts are for the Flyers, it changes things drastically for them upcoming. Obviously, you get a guy like Matvei Michkov to come over here, and he is a player that Briere and his staff took a swing on, right? In last
Yeah.
year's draft, he's an elite talent. There were initial concerns, obviously, and this is what caused him to drop in the NHL draft last year. It's about him actually being able to terminate that contract with SKA St. Petersburg and when he might be able to come over to the NHL. And that was something that kind of had teams take a hands-off approach with him, and really what led to him falling into the Flyers' laps. And with Briere, taking that swing and Michkov being able to get out of this contract early, essentially, it really looks like it's paid off, right? And
Yeah.
it does kind of look like a lot of NHL teams might have been jumping to conclusions here, because it seems as though, despite the geopolitical issues occurring in Russia, that, players are indeed potentially able, to get out of contracts early and still get over here, similarly to they were doing before, the kind of dispute, obviously, between Russia and Ukraine. So that's one aspect of it. And then the other aspect for me is just incentive to do things this offseason for Briere, right? Like, you have a talent like Michkov coming to your roster. I think that gives more incentive to the Flyers to potentially be more aggressive this offseason. Like, I do think they're not going to trade away like future assets and things like that.
Right.
But I think with a guy like Michkov, ideally, it would probably give them a lot more incentive to address their needs at center in some capacity, whether that's trying to draft a high-end center and knowing that, okay, that box is checked off internally once you kind of make that selection. Or I would say just maybe even trying to make a trade that you might have not thought would be beneficial to you this offseason, right? Because ultimately, even though Michkov's coming over and he's played seasons in the KHL and, has almost been a point per game type of player, in the NHL or in the KHL, I mean, there's no telling, how he's going to translate to the NHL. Like, I do agree that he likely is going to be a major impact top six type of forward, but you do need to surround him with talented players as well. Not to say the Flyers don't have, players they can surround him with, like a Travis Konechny, like a Sean Couturier, but I do think for the Flyers front office, getting him that long-term, 1C fit that he's going to be playing center with for years to come probably is top of mind and something that's, at the top of their list going forward here, right? Because that's ultimately what you're going to need to kind of round out building this team, is adding that center to play with Michkov long term.
Yeah. And we'll dig a little more into that, but I think your speculation on where the organization needs to go overall is astute, right? Like, they have to be thinking this. Let's be honest, they had a better inclination of when this was all going to break down than we did publicly. We had hints, we were grasping on anything that was coming out of the KHL. But they kind of have a plan that's masked around this. And we'll talk about several things that we've seen kind of in, on the public stage here that kind of lead to, the fact that this is probably led by someone. Again, this is a game-changing type of player. And I do want to repeat a couple statistics that we had from elite prospects leading up to the draft. I stated this in my Michkov got drafted video right during the draft. And again, Vasili was at the draft at the time. He's going to be at the draft again this year. But these are a couple things, a few highlights of Michkov leading up to this season that he went through. So most points ever by a D-2 MHL player in history, 56 points in 56 games. Youngest player ever to suit up for a Russian national team. Best under 17 goal scorer in MHL history. Also first KHL player to ever score at 16 years old in the KHL. Highest scoring rate for an under 18 MHL player. Highest scoring rate by a draft year player in the VHL. Most goals by a draft year eligible in the VHL. Highest scoring rate for a D1 minus KHL player. Highest scoring rate for a draft year KHL player in general. World championship 18 and under MVP. Best forward, most points, all-star team, second highest goal total for a 16-year-old at the under 18s in history. Most points at the Hlinka Gretzky Cup. And again, he had 12 goals in that series. Bedard had 8 in that series. It's there was kind of a revisionist history because the war in Russia broke out at the time that he was drafted. But he was, leading into that draft, considered the Russian Bedard. I even was watching a video prior to this where there was a conversation between Michkov in complete Russian and like kind of interviews and players within the KHL or I'm sorry, staff within the KHL organization talking about how him and Bedard kind of became friends actually, and they were like opening each other's house to one another because everybody was comparing the two of them. And then the fact that Michkov ended up going at 7 was a complete political, kind of wrapped up in that risk of a 3-year deal, KHL squabble issue. But there's no way this guy should have lasted past 4. I mean, Will Smith is obviously a hell of a prospect. Leo Carlson's a hell of a prospect. Adam Fantilli are a hell of, like, let's not diminish these guys for what they
No,
are.
definitely not. Yeah.
But Michkov should have been number 2 overall. And the Flyers got extremely lucky that they worked out a good relationship with this guy to allow him to drop to 7. Because let's be honest, all Canadians at number 5 wanted Matvei Michkov. And because he didn't want to go to Montreal, he didn't want to go to Arizona, he ended up coming to Philadelphia. And he kind of got to pick, because of the leverage that he had being a KHL player on these tenuous times, that player really had to go where he wanted to go. And we're going to talk about Ivan Demidov, or Demidov, however you want to say it, a little bit after this, and how maybe that impacts his draft year as well. But there's a lot of good stuff here to be excited about. So let's speculate on the ELC, and then I'll open up to you, Vasili. So we assume, and what we're hearing is a 3-year standard ELC. We brought this up in episodes already. It'll probably be 3.5 million, somewhere around there. The initial base salary will be 925,000. That standard ELC for a top player coming into the NHL. But he will be getting substantial bonuses above that. So for everybody who thinks that he's going to be a very cheap young asset, that is not going to be the case. We will talk a little bit of how that impacts the rest of the roster. Cam Atkinson is definitely in that thought process there. But what are your thoughts about the ELC? And I guess you can add whatever you want as far as what I said about him, reputation wise.
Yeah, of course. So for the ELC, I think it's pretty clear based on similar prospects in that same draft. Likely Michkov's 3-year ELC will be set up similarly to prospects like a Bedard, like, Leo Carlson, like a Will Smith. There's going to be performance bonuses structured in there.
Yep.
So he can hit those bonuses, potentially make back some of that money that might have been fronted to him by his agent to kind of terminate his contract with SKA. I'm not sure if that's the exact situation that happened, but there's some way here that Michkov must have terminated his contract with SKA St. Petersburg. He had to ultimately pay that out. So in a sense,
it was 1 million paid out.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, he had to pay that out. So in a sense here, the Flyers adding these bonuses are almost like kind of rewarding him and a favor to him for, okay, you're buying yourself out of this contract. Let us reward you with these bonuses to help you kind of pay that back, to the KHL, to SKA St. Petersburg. So like I said, it's pretty clear that, bonuses will be structured in there. Specifically, here's a tweet from Pierre LeBrun kind of running down what he expects to occur over the next little while here with Michkov. LeBrun stated, sources confirm SKA will give Michkov his release on Monday. Which makes sense because right now as we're recording this, it's like 11 o'clock or 12 o'clock in Russia. So they're obviously not going to release him during the middle of the night here. And then LeBrun also adds on, sources say it's based on a compassionate grounds about Michkov's father passing away a year ago. JP Barry and Pat Brisson of CAA Hockey, so a particular agency that represents a lot of players in the NHL, secured the rights to represent Michkov actually a few weeks ago. And we're working in collaboration with agent Paul Theophanos on Michkov's release. Once Michkov is released, he should be in North America, in Philadelphia, joining the Flyers in about 1 to 2 weeks. But it really depends on the immigration and visa process. So there's been rumblings as well that, okay, he might be in Philadelphia for development camp that takes place between July 2nd and 6th. But just preliminarily with the visa situation, it might be tough. So that'll be like a wait and see factor. But it definitely is looking like, Michkov's ELC is going to be similar to a lot of those other high-end prospects from the 2023 draft.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, but as you were stating that timeline, the reason I am a little skeptical that it'll take, several weeks and this is the only reason, is we heard that about Kolosov and we heard that about Fedotov, and they were literally here like a week later. So I'm not saying that anybody is wrong. I'm not calling anybody a bullshit or anything like that. But we heard the same thing about those guys, and they were over here considerably quicker
They could
than we
have these things
anticipated.
pre-planned and kind of pre-sorted out potentially if they've been
Right,
working on it for
potentially.
months.
Right. We
Yeah.
don't know. We don't know. It's a complete speculation.
Yeah, but we'll see. And I think
I,
what this leads into is the fact that, hey, that initial report from, I believe it was, what's the news outlet in Russia that was
Hockey
reporting on
News
all
Hub.
this? Hockey News Hub, but like there was a site that put out a report like
Oh
initially.
God, I can't remember.
Anyway, that site that put
Sports
the
something.
yeah, Sports EU Express or something like
Yeah,
that.
I
I think
forget.
it's like Sports
Sorry.
Express or something like
Yeah.
that. No worries. It's like something off the top of our heads, but
Yeah.
I do believe like Sports Express, when they put that initial report out stating, okay, most of this will be wrapped up by the end of June, that seems to be an accurate report, right? Like, despite the
Well,
fact that,
Medvedev said it, right? The chairman of SCA
yeah, exactly.
himself.
So I would have to agree that that report, I mean, though people called it bullshit, and weren't sure about the credibility behind it, it
Yeah.
does seem like the timeline was pretty accurate. And as you can see, this news all comes out before June 30th. And I do think from the Flyers perspective, it definitely helps them to get this news before the draft and before free agency, because it could
Yes.
change some of their strategy draft
100%.
wise and free agency wise. I'm sure it also helps Scott too, because, the KHL season starts essentially the beginning of August. So training camps are going to start ramping up for the KHL in July. So they also want to,
Get
be
this
aware
out of
of
the
what's
way.
be
Right.
aware of what's happening with Michkov and all that type of
And
stuff.
and same with
So
Sochi, right? If there was a potential chance, I'm sure Sochi would have wanted him back. And I do want to add this real quick. Matvei Michkov himself liked an Instagram post of Barstool Philly with their report of Matvei Michkov will be a Flyer next season.
so that's a
So
pretty good indication. Yeah.
yeah, we are reaching for every little sign. But look, we both said this on the podcast, right? Like, if it didn't happen, we were surprised, right? Because like all of these things don't normally happen.
The
You
signs were
know?
leading up to it, right? Like
Yes.
it's almost like writing on the wall, or like, crumbs from a cookie kind of crumbling and falling here. Like eventually you're going to get led to the source and, find out what's kind of happening with this situation. So there was a ton of smoke here, and typically where there's smoke, there's fire,
There's
right?
fire. Yeah.
And we obviously see here and kind of understand that Michkov's going to be making his way over. There is one thing I wanted to add, and like it is something where I think we kind of look at past drafts and how things played out, and we might not totally understand what kind of talent Michkov is, and kind of who he was really being compared to leading into the 2023 draft. Like similar to all the stats that you mentioned, Yariv, like years leading into the draft, the 1-2 combination that prospect scouts and a lot of scouts were really excited about were Connor Bedard and Matvei Michkov. Those were the 1 and the 2, and were expected to go 1 and 2 in the draft, really, until all of this geopolitical issues kind of came up with Russia and Ukraine, and this war kind of began. And then that's where you kind of get the concerns about Michkov not being able to get out of his contract, which obviously with this are false. But like to point out, right, like in the under 18 World Championship, Michkov leads the tournament, 12 goals, 16 points. He was the best player at that tournament, and outscores Bedard, who had 14 points in the same amount of games that Michkov played in 7 games. In the Hlinka Gretzky Cup in 2021, Michkov also leads that tournament in scoring, and actually beats the previous record holder, Cole Perfetti, by a single point with 13 points. Bedard did not play in that tournament. But I think, a lot of the hockey world, like due to this kind of news surrounding Michkov, forgets how highly touted he really was, and the fact that he was, outperforming Connor Bedard in tournaments that they were both in together. I think I see a lot of people online saying, oh, well, getting Michkov doesn't speed up any timeline or do anything like that. And to a point, I agree. But I think when you're getting a guy of such a talent level, you have to understand that he's also going to want to play with more talented players and things like that. So the Flyers are going to try to find ways to surround him with more talent here as the years go along versus, waiting several years to do so, I think. So
I think it's also important. Like I heard a lot of talk about how like, yeah, like even Ovechkin coming over and Crosby coming over, like their teams weren't very good. Even when they came over, right? And that is the truth. Like one player will not I say myself, will not change your organization. However, this is a team that missed the playoffs by 1 point last year. And you can say they overachieved. I don't buy that, considering Vasili and I were able to predict where they would finish. And so did other people. Like to us, it wasn't surprising. Like
we thought they would be on the bubble, and that's what happened. They were basically right there on the outside looking in by a point.
So this is a bubble playoff team that just added one of the best young players in the world, not coming in at 18 years old, where guys like Carlson and Bedard and Fantilli came in at 18. Michkov will be coming in at 19 with 2 years of experience playing against men.
I think that's something to factor in, Yariv.
Yes.
Like that's a great point you brought up. Like the fact that he's played against men in the KHL for the last 2 seasons and almost put up a point a game in those situations.
Actually, technically, it's 3.5 years because he played in the VHL, which is men.
Yeah, that too.
That's their AHL.
He played 16 games, for SKA as well, I believe, or something close to that before before Roman Rottenberg became the head coach a couple of years ago. So he's had quite a number of games, playing against men where a lot of these prospects that went straight into the NHL from the draft last season, like a Fantilli, like a Bedard, they had really good first seasons, but it was really their first kick at the can learning to play against men, whereas Michkov's already done that. Obviously the NHL is a different league, but I think that definitely helps him in his transition, right?
Yeah. And I'm hearing like a lot of people saying, oh, the Flyers have to go out and bring somebody in for him to model. I'm like, guys, that's what Travis Konechny is here for. That's what Sean Couturier is here for. Like these are not scrubs. We know Couturier was playing with a muscle core issue halfway through the year. We have other veterans around here. We have Owen Tippett, who's a young star in the league, doing spinoramas. Like this team is not completely devoid of talent where he's walking into a San Jose situation where he has to be the man coming in here. This is actually completely ideal where he can come and not have to be the man as soon as he gets in here. That is the benefit of having Travis Konechny here, who is a veteran who can take on that role. Right? Like we don't have to have Bedard coming in and throwing him in the last minute of the game in the beginning of the season, being like, hey, get out there and start scoring. You don't know that much English. And by the way, we have 2 Russian players on this team right now, Yegor Zamula and what's his name? Ivan Fedotov. Like we have 2 guys already who can help translate him. I'm not saying that you shouldn't add another. I'm not saying there's no benefit to
they
that.
probably might, right? It's possible.
Right. It's definitely possible. But if you look at it on the surface level, like the Flyers prepared for this. This is why you don't dump your entire team. Because then you bring in a guy like Michkov and, barring another guy, and you're like, well, have at it, guys. You're now the face of this franchise. And it's like, they don't need to do that. They have guys already who are, and he can work his way up to it. Sorry, go ahead, man.
They already have a competitive team, right? Obviously, they competed in, majority of the season last season against some of the upper echelon, teams in the league. So
I think all of them once this year, except for Nashville.
Exactly, right?
Only
so
team
I think
to do that.
I think when you add in a guy like a Michkov who's shown in the KHL to be able to produce at a near elite, point per game type levels, it definitely is exciting to add him to this Flyers roster that, did have a good amount of talent last season, but they were lacking, I think, a bit of dynamic ability, which obviously Michkov's going to be able to bring in spades. And I do think, too, the main thing with Michkov is we know how impactful of a player he can be on the power play, and we know how terrible the Flyers' power play has been. Obviously, you don't want to put that all on a young player like him, but I mean, if you've watched him play and just see the way he can handle the puck and the way he kind of dissect opposing defenders, he's gonna be a big help on the power play. It just is what it is, right?
Yeah,
And that's my thoughts on it.
absolutely. And so let's do this. I'll give mine, and then you do yours. What do we expect as an offensive output for this guy? Again, let's not confuse this. He is a very young player. He is 19 years old. You saw, like, I do not diminish the talent of Leo Carlsson and Adam Fantilli. They were both 40-point players in the NHL this year. Bedard was a 60-point player with a severe injury to the face this year. Still an elite player. And Bedard is an exception, right? He is
Yeah.
a potential generational talent. And maybe Michkov is on that level. We will see. But what do we expect from a real young player on a mediocre team, an average team in the league, right? They're in that middle, 20 to 15 range. Overall, they had a 10-game losing streak that dropped them out of it, but they let's be realistic, they're right there. They're right in that bubble with the rest of those teams. They missed the playoff by 1 point. What can a guy like this do? Assuming the power play is marginally better, and maybe with him, it might be a little bit better now. We'll see what the Flyers do additionally here. Again, the offseason has not even started. What I think would be realistic for this year is a 50, potentially a 60-point year. I think 60 would be fantastic. I think 50 would be great. I think if he hits 40 points, that's still really good. Again, he's transitioning from a different style of play, though I will say, in my opinion, and I'm not an NHL scout, but his game style, the way he plays around the net, in the corners, the fact that he's not a burner, that he's a high skill, high IQ guy with a phenomenal shot, but potential to be the best goal scorer in the NHL type of shooter. I could see him kind of being that, like, excelling in the NHL game even more than the KHL offensively, just because of his style of game. I don't suspect that he'll have much problem transitioning. The only thing really is the fact that he's not a huge player, and he's not a burner in combination, but he has everything else in spades. Like, I've even seen some scouting reports that had like things that they didn't think he was like I don't even agree with. It's hard for me to agree with anybody's opinion fully. So I kind of question everything. I know what I've seen of the kid. And, I think a 20 goal, 30 assist season, a 25 goal, 25 assist season. I don't know. I'm just throwing out random numbers, but like a 50-point season, I think, is 100% doable. And if all things go exceptionally well and the Flyers offense kind of rolls a little bit more, Sean Couturier is kind of back to where he was in the first half of this year. The young players continue to move forward and things kind of play as a well-oiled machine. I mean, a 60-point season, I don't think is completely out of the question, considering the guy's talent level. Having said that, if he doesn't hit that type of stride, if he is a 40-point player this year, I don't think anybody should panic and assume that this guy's not going to be a superstar in the league. But just given the talent level, and we look how good, somebody like even Bobby Brink did this year, who put up 30 points, who's nowhere near Michkov's level, and a guy like Tyson Forrester, who looks like he could project to be a sincere top line player in this league. Who had a 20-point year or a 20 goal a year, right? Really learned the game and was exceptional in all situations. I don't see how Michkov kind of doesn't hit a 40-point year bare minimum. But in my eyes, like a 55-point season is 100% up for grabs. What do you think?
Yeah, I think for sure the bare minimum for me would be like 40, 45 points, but
Yeah.
I don't expect him to, be at that level. I would expect that he's going to have probably closer to a 55, 60-point season.
Mm-hmm.
Likely for me, my expectation is 60 points actually, especially if he plays the full 82 games. I think he will be probably closer to a 60-point player. And there's a lot of reasons for my thoughts on that. The main thing is, and we've mentioned it before, is just the fact that he's played in the KHL. for seasons at this point, right? Like in 2021-22, that was, almost 3 years ago. He played 13 games against men in the KHL when he was a 16-year-old. In 2022-23, he played 27 games and had 20 points. This past season, he played 47 games with Sochi and had 41 points. So really,
with pneumonia.
yeah,
Just
with
to
pneumonia.
I think it's very important to point out.
Yeah, with pneumonia as well. So that's super important to add. But um, I just think looking at the way that he produced in a league against men already, albeit the KHL isn't the NHL, it's probably closer to being on par with the AHL,
Yeah,
somewhat like that. But
sure.
to see a player of that age that Michkov is to be able to produce at that level, I think it just shows that he'll be able to jump to the next level at the NHL and also probably do the same. It's going to take a little bit of time probably for him to adjust, get used to, the NHL surface ice, things like that. Certain things, will be different in terms of maybe like shooting angles, how he changes the angles on the ice with his shot and his deception. That might take some time, but like as a player, that's things you work out like preseason, training camp. You'll work those kinks out. And the main thing with Michkov is just the hockey sense and the hockey IQ, right? He's such a smart player on the ice, at least from what I've watched of him. And the past season, I caught some games of him playing in the KHL, and he's always finding those soft areas on the ice. And that is something that, players, it usually translates for them from level to level, right? Hockey sense is not something that you lose. Jumping levels and going, up to the highest level. It's usually something you can use to your advantage, actually. And I think him being such a smart player will help him adjusting to a new league, because he's just usually kind of aware of those spaces to go where you need to be impactful and be effective. Like, he was never a perimeter player in the KHL. He's always one willing to go to the net. And I think with that style being emphasized more in the NHL, he'll probably even compound on that a bit more too.
Great point.
And I do think too with Michkov, you have to factor in, like, he's putting up 41 points in 47 games with Sochi, and that is not a talented team, right? He's going to be playing with, I would argue, some of the most talented players he's probably ever played with so far in his young career.
Probably the most.
Exactly. And that is going to help him produce even more, right? When you're playing with guys that can put pucks in the net, and maybe you would set players up in the KHL, and sometimes they wouldn't always, have that ability to finish some of these chances. So I think that's going to help him in his production too. So that's kind of why I'm leaning towards more of the 60-point ceiling for him. And then one final thing to add is, there were certain things in his game that scouts kind of frowned upon. And some of that was like he would fly the zone early in the KHL and try to like set up offensive chances for himself, or things like that. But in the NHL, and the way, and the Flyers kind of implemented their style last season, that new style where, forwards are trying to exit the zone early. Forwards are trying to look up ice and kind of get open for that stretch pass. I think the way he plays is actually pretty suitable to the Flyer style of play and how they changed their style this upcoming season. And we even saw John Torella mention that in his press conference, right? Like, the team changed their style of play to get ready for a guy like Michkov, who, flies the zone, is thinking offense. He's thinking of, okay, how do we get this breakout to work through the neutral zone so we can get, speed leading into the blue line and make that, transition offensive rush chance and things like that. So I think Michkov's definitely a player that plays fast. And I think the Flyers were, in an attempt to get ready for him, trying to learn to play fast too. Not all because of that. That's just kind of the style of the NHL now. All teams kind of want to play fast, make chances through their transition play and things along those lines. But I do think the Flyer style of play is going to be, conducive to helping Michkov adjust, and will even help him, produce even more as he comes in as a rookie.
Yeah, and I'll be honest with you, like, there is a part of me, and I want to be very clear, this is a highly optimistic part of me. I'm like, why can he put up 70 points in the league? I mean, what is Bedard going to be putting up next year? Again, they're going to be the same age. Like, I know Bedard's got the extra experience in the NHL, but this is about an annual development. And I look at guys like Kaprizov and all these guys, it's like, I don't know. I think if he comes in and put up 70 points in the league, I mean, people are going to be, their minds will be blown.
I want to just search up quickly, like, Panarin. What was his point total like?
Yeah, but he was like mid-20s, but he was
sure.
You can't 80 plus points. I think it was like 82 points in his first year.
Yeah, it had like 77 points his first year.
Obviously, that's what it was.
Obviously, it's not. Yeah, it's not a similar comparison because like you're playing with Patrick Kane and he had years of years in the
Yeah,
KHL, but it still shows that like playing in that league and transitioning over for a lot of guys, it wasn't a barrier to them, right?
right. I mean, Ovechkin came in here. I think he had 40 goals his first year
Over
in the
100
league.
points his first year.
Yeah, yeah. No, it was 50. They have 50 goals first year.
I he may have, I'll
I
have to
think he
check,
might. I
but
think he might have.
he definitely
Definitely
had
over 40.
he
Definitely
definitely had
40
over
now.
100 points. Yeah, 52 goals, 106
Yeah.
points, man. So
And
crazy.
again, I'm not saying he's Ovechkin, but like 100 points in your first year. I think he was what, 20, 19 or 20?
Something along those lines, yeah.
Yeah, when he came into the league. So I'm not saying that Michkov is going to be Ovechkin. God willing, he is. But even if he's 70%, 80% of Ovechkin, he should be able to come in here and
60,
really,
70 points. It's
yeah, and
realistic.
really light the world on fire. Now, again, if he doesn't mean anybody should panic. Look, at the bare minimum, this guy is like all-star level player. Can he be generational? We'll see. A lot of people are trying to diminish that already. I've seen nothing about him to say that he can't be generational, but we
Yeah.
don't know. We don't know about that transition to the NHL game. I personally, like you said, I think you broke it down phenomenally. I think his game actually is better suited for the NHL than the KHL. So I think I don't think the transition will be that big of a deal, but we also want to temper our expectations. Like again, Adam Fantilli is a phenomenal player,
So
phenomenal
was
young talent. I would
Carlson.
kill to have him here. Again, yeah, Leo Carlson as well, but like they didn't come in here and put up. Are they still projected to be 80 to 100 point players? 100%. So we just you don't want to panic off your initial thing. He's still a 19-year
He's
old.
still very young, yeah.
Yeah, and you'll
Uh,
hear older people say that, and I think they're absolutely right. Like always, for your own mental health, temper your expectations.
no, but I also think our side of it too, and why we kind of wanted to mention all these things about, him outscoring Bedard, him being considered as that number two behind Bedard, kind of leading into these draft years, is because a lot of this, has kind of been forgotten. So there's always that other side to it as well. Like he's such a young player who knows how he's going to adapt. But I think it's also important to point out that, he was put into this type of, elite, potentially generational status leading up into that draft. And then
Yeah,
all this news kind of took that away in a sense. So I do just think that it's important to understand that, hey, like that potential is there. You never know when it's exactly going to hit because every player's development is different, especially coming over from, a new
yes,
country into a new league. It might not be a seamless adaptation for
right.
Michkov, but that potential and that skill is there for him to certainly be, a really high end player in this league. And I think at this point, just everything he's done, like, in international play for Russia, leading up to, him coming over here, all his play in the KHL, all of these things have highlighted the fact that, hey, this guy looks to be a generational talent just based on his production, everything we've seen when you compare it to past, prospects and things
Yeah,
like that. So you
100%.
can't ignore that, right?
Right. Yeah. Very well said. So, you mentioned it earlier, and I'm glad that you mentioned it. It's a perfect transition to our next kind of portion about this is John Tortorella, right? He's going to be the coach. And there's a lot of hesitation there with a lot of people already writing Tortorella off as not being the coach of this team when the team is competitive. I'll be honest with you, I don't buy that for a goddamn second. I think people have their personal biases and they ooze out of them. I think people have this perception of Tortorella like he's some kind of unique dinosaur, except that if you really look at him, he says the exact same shit that all coaches around the league say. He just says it a lot blunter, and the media just grabs on everything he says. And I think you stated it perfectly. What kind of coach that is planning on diminishing Michkov, right? Is going to say what he says, where nicknaming him the Mad Russian, talks about preparing his team for when Michkov comes over here. I think Tortorella is just waiting for this guy right now and cannot wait to have him as a
Probably
weapon in his
ecstatic.
art. Yeah, I think he is extremely excited about it. I'm not particularly worried. I think he can help Michkov become a more well-balanced player, one that took Alexander Ovechkin a long time to become a more balanced player. He was kind of known as a floater for a long time. And I don't think Michkov is the type of personality, from everything I say, to kind of push his coach out. He's been extremely cordial, extremely calm. You see nothing about him publicly complaining about the situation. I mean, he was playing 3 minutes under Rottenberg. He was being pushed around, thrown around. You've heard nothing about complaints from this guy. So why he wouldn't fit under John Tortorella, I don't know why that assumption is being made. I think people just have this fear thing with like, oh, let's not break it type of thing. But I really don't get that sense from Michkov. I think it could be really successful. I think if it's not successful, the organization will take a look at that. But he's not going to break him in a year. He's not
No.
going to break him in a year or 2 years. And guys like Line and Dubois, they weren't successful in their games in the way they play other places beyond Tortorella. He was right about them. Dubois has complained about every situation he has been in. Like
Winnipeg, LA, now he's in Washington.
yeah, like be weary of picking the player's side in these Tortorella situations because Tortorella has a history of being right. Like Dubinsky had a problem with Tortorella. Dubinsky wasn't that good of a player, right? His career did not thrive away from Tortorella. If anything, it was better under Tortorella. So like I don't want to assume that Tortorella is the bad guy in all these situations, and I think we need to give it really time to play out.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts about Tortorella, his ability to coach Matvei Michkov? And actually want, real quick before I transition to you, I do want to give a shout out to PHLY, to Bill Matz, who broke down a segment of the Trevor Zegras saga between Tortorella and Zegras about how harsh Tortorella was about Zegras. And again, this isn't a Michkov story, but he was trying to prove a point that Zegras could play under Tortorella. And if you really look back at those highlights, at what transpired publicly, Tortorella was like not a bad guy. Like he was just like, look, I don't like the flashy stuff because I like the basic hard playing hockey, the stuff that actually makes you successful in the playoffs. He's like all that Michkov, behind the net Michigan stuff, like that stuff's cool. He goes, it's really cool. But he doesn't like it because it moves away from the fundamentals that really make you successful. And that's all he was saying. He wasn't going, he even said, he's like, I hope he does it again. He goes, do it again. Prove me wrong. He's like, do it again. He's not like this horrible guy who goes like, I don't like any fancy stuff in hockey. I think that is completely conflated by Twitter and media. And look, there is a point to it to some degree, but I think Tortorella is just more public about this stuff where other coaches just keep it to themselves. And that is Tortorella's problem, is that he vocalizes it to people outside of, the comfort of a quiet conversation. And he'll say it in front of media who immediately look to make a story out of everything.
Yeah, so I think for Tortorella and Michkov and his ability to coach Michkov and the concerns behind that, I think it's probably something that is a non-concern, to be honest. Like I'm not concerned. And
not at this point.
No, exactly. Until something happens, right? Like I think there's no point of being concerned that they're not going to be compatible with one another until some sort of issue occurs between the two, which at this point has not occurred. How many players has John Tortorella assisted in their development over the years? How many players have gotten better under John Tortorella over the years? Like look at Cam York, for example. Since John Tortorella's been the coach of the Philadelphia Flyers, Cam York has become a better player. Since John Tortorella,
you mean Columbus Blue Jackets?
What do you mean?
Cam York. I'm sorry. I'm thinking Cam Atkinson in my head.
Yeah, no worries. Anyway, so yeah, since Cam York's become a Flyer, right? Since Cam York's been on the team and Tortorella's been the coach, he's become a way better player. Same thing for a lot of players like Owen Tippett,
Morgan Frost.
Exactly, right?
Who he hated.
Yeah, and just look at the rest of Tortorella's coaching career, right? Look at players like Martin St. Louis. Look at players like Zach Werenski, like Seth Jones. Like there's always been those
Panarin.
There's always been certain stories
under him.
Yeah, there's always been certain stories of, Tortorella having issues with some players, like a Dubinsky in the past, like even Vinny Lecavalier in his early days in Tampa, like even Patrick Laine, like even Pierre-Luc Dubois. And with the Lecavalier situation, they ended up working things out, and Lecavalier became one of the best goal scorers of his era. I would argue one of the best players of that era. And for other players, I think really it comes down to work ethic, right? Like you look at a Laine, you look at a Dubois, under every coach they've played under the NHL, work ethic's always been questioned. And I think it always comes back to the player. And I think for Tortorella, it's about a work ethic type of thing. Like if you're not working hard, he's going to call you out on that. And for me, Matvei Michkov looks like a guy that works extremely hard on all aspects of his game. You see videos of this guy working on the ice constantly, in off ice situations, working in the weight room, trying to get stronger, trying to better his game and doing things like in that scenario. So for me, I don't have any concerns of Michkov and Tortorella kind of assimilating with one another. I would say that Michkov probably in his work ethic is something that maybe Tortorella will be impressed by, right? Like there's obviously things that Michkov's going to need to learn in terms of the defensive game in the NHL. He's far from a finished product. He's only 19 years old. Right. And I think Tortorella, if you look at his past and his actually ability to develop players and help them become complete players, he's going to be able to help Michkov. I don't think he's going to deter Michkov, in my opinion. Will there be times where maybe they clash? Sure, but, any coach player relationship that can happen, I think it's natural for that. And it's actually, a good thing for them to potentially work through that. And it might help him even become a better player. So personally, I'm not too concerned. And until there's something to be concerned about, I think it's just kind of going off a couple of negative situations that Tortorella might have had in his past that people are pinpointing and not looking at all the positives that he's done for so many players throughout, throughout his career across the league. He's made so many guys better. Why would you focus on, just a couple of negative situations when typically he's been a guy that's helped, his team get better, help his players get better and be the best they can be? I think he could probably do the same for Michkov. And to your point, Yariv, I also think that if you look at the way the Flyers are playing, and he even mentioned himself, they were almost putting this style into play last season to get ready for Michkov. Right. So why would he isolate him and call him out when you're literally preparing your team for this player to come over?
Yeah. And, I think those are great points. So let's think about, how can the team, let's say, how is the team going to maybe change when Michkov gets here? I will say this. I don't expect them to make any drastic changes in his first season here. I think barring, considering where the cap is, considering their cap implications, and where they are with some of these players, some of these roster players today, the fact the cap's going to go up next year, the fact that his cap hit is going to be about $3.5 million this year, most likely, they don't have necessarily a ton of room to make a bunch of moves. And I really don't think, and I believe Danny Briere, from what they're saying, they're not really looking to kind of change the course because Michkov gets here. I think a lot of it is kind of just, let's bring Michkov in, let's see how he does, and we'll adapt from there. So I don't expect some kind of big changes, going on, just the fact that Michkov will get here. I think him coming here is enough changes immediately. And I think the Flyers are kind of still waiting for their cap situation to clear up a little bit more. Having said that, they do have a situation here with Cam Atkinson. Now, Atkinson's already been rumored. This would kind of explain why they've been trying to get rid of him. To be honest with you, because if you look at it right now, it looks like Bobby Brink probably is going to be starting off in the AHL with Michkov joining the team. You already have 13 forwards, considering Delorier will play that 13th forward spot. Now, maybe Brink makes it too, but, you look at the fourth line, which is probably Ryan Poehling and, Hathaway. Cates is mixed in there. Lawton's mixed in there. We still have Joel Farabee. I've seen people say that, Jerry Farabee is now a goner. I don't see how this is related at all. In fact, I don't see Joel Farabee being traded. But I do think the Flyers will probably look over time to bring in some kind of high-end center to this team to play with Michkov. Do I think they're going to rush into it immediately? No. I don't think so. I think they look at their forward depth right now and go, okay, there are enough pieces right now for him to play with. We don't need to necessarily rush. We don't have an elite number one center, but we have a damn good playmaker in Morgan Frost, who is evolving. And let's see what happens with Frost. He's still locked up here. Maybe Frost ends up getting traded. Maybe he's not the guy, but I don't think the Flyers are looking really to make drastic changes. I think they'll look to free up a roster spot here, knowing that Cam Atkinson really doesn't have a spot. Whether he gets bought out or traded, I'm still not sure. I think with Michkov coming over here, the odds of him getting bought out kind of increase, to be honest with you, because they really need to get rid of a roster player, and he is the most likely candidate. Unless they plan on, benching one of these fours for a significant amount of time. Again, Michkov would not be coming over here to be benched. Let's make that very clear. The Flyers wouldn't waste his time to do that either. They wouldn't, because he's better off just playing overseas and developing. I think the Flyers immediately pencil him into the top 9 and realistically see him as a top 6 option going into this season, and most likely will pencil him in a top 6 role going into the first game of the season. That could definitely change. I think by the end of the season, he's on the top line, personally. There are still other changes the team could make. We know the Trevor Zegras rumors are out there. There might be a smart move out there. I don't know. And if it's a good move, they should make it, right? Like, just because you have a recovering Couturier, an evolving Frost, doesn't mean you're set, right? Like, there are opportunities to make moves. I just don't think the Flyers are going to be cornering themselves in. I kind of said this earlier. The big sell going into this season are the 2 first-round picks this year and bringing over Michkov. That alone carries you enough momentum to fill this stadium and to get excitement for next season.
Yeah, well, think about the tickets you're going to sell based off Michkov, first of all.
Michkov
think about the
alone.
jersey sales as well, right?
And I will say this. I don't think Michkov being converted to center is completely out of the question.
Well,
do I think it would happen in the first
year? Yeah.
Right. Do I think it'll happen in his first year? Absolutely not. Do I think over time? I do think he has the skill set for it.
I think he has the IQ. Particularly,
exactly.
When I've seen
all
the
capability.
Yeah, when I've seen him play in the past, like a lot of the ways, at least I watched a lot of the preseason for him when he played for SKA, and he was tried as a center. And when I was watching those games, there's just a lot of similarities. The way he would kind of play as a center, exit the zone to Pavel Datsyuk. I don't want to say he's going to be like a Datsyuk, but just the smarts. And like, I watched a ton of Datsyuk as well, was a huge fan of him.
Yeah,
I do see a lot of similarities between the two. Like I said, I mean, we're not saying he's going to be Datsyuk, but just something for people to think about. But yeah, in terms of like the Flyer strategy this offseason, if this kind of changes things, I do think with, like, to your point, Yariv, with Michkov coming over, that takes up another wing spot. The Flyers are loaded on the wings. They're going to have to get rid of somebody on the wings. I mean, the easiest candidate and what we've been hearing is Cam Atkinson. Based on, what's happening with Michkov, I would expect Atkinson to probably not be a Flyer moving forward. It just makes the most sense because you move Atkinson out, Michkov immediately takes his spot. It's kind of a 1-for-1 type of swap that you're doing. I also wouldn't be surprised, with guys like Brink potentially being pushed on the outside here. Does that open up the Flyers trying to move maybe some other bottom of the lineup type guys out, right? Like, does a Nick Delorier type become expendable perhaps? Does a Scott Lawton type, I mean, although they're, thin at center, does he become expendable perhaps because you're trying to kind of
100%.
Yeah. Are you trying to like make pieces fit and kind of maneuver your roster in different ways? So I think some of the bottom of the lineup type guys might be a little bit more expendable. And it also depends what comes their way in a hockey trade, right? Like, I do think the Flyers are cognizant, I mean, of the fact that they lack depth at center. They probably lack that number 1 true elite center. Briere even mentioned it in his past press conferences that they know they're thin at center and they want to add to that depth.
Mm-hmm.
Not to say that they're going to put a deadline on themselves to say, okay, we need to get this guy this summer or anything. But to your point and what you were saying, I do think if certain players are available, if certain trades potentially could arise and the Flyers might have the assets, they might jump in on it because they might think to themselves, hey, when are we going to get another opportunity to get a guy like this? Let's execute now and worry about the money later down the line.
But I'm sorry to cut you off, but we know it's going to be a younger guy too, who's not going to be fully developed either.
Exactly, right? So I think it's going to be a wait and see situation as to like who's available this offseason, who potentially could be like one of those young guys they might target. To your point, as Zegras has been thrown up, could that be somebody? Who knows, right? Like we've seen his name thrown out there. Does this give the Flyers more incentive to act on that? It's possible, but I think it depends on what it's going to take. I mean, we've heard of Marco Rossi get thrown out there. That would be a type of guy that's similar, right? Maybe even a Cole Perfetti's been thrown out there from Winnipeg as well. So
can I just cut you off because I like what you're saying? What about the opportunity to move Bobby Brink in a trade?
I was going to bring that up as well.
Maybe it's again, I'm just throwing a complete random scenario, but maybe it's a Bobby Brink a Morgan Frost, and now you're most likely going to have 3 second-round picks next year. I do believe Columbus is going to end up taking that first because it's the number 36 overall pick.
Yeah.
Taking that first second-round pick that we have this year and moving it to next year, and we'll be picking next year. So that gives us 3 next year. You could move a second-round pick with Frost, with Bobby Brink, and that is a hell of a return for what could be a young forward where like, hey, look, you're getting a guy who's still potentially a 60-point center in the NHL. You're getting a guy who could be a 60-point winger in the NHL, at bare minimum 40, 40, 50-point player, maybe 60 in Bobby Brink's case. And then you get a second-round pick on top of that. That is the type of deal you could make for a young centerman.
I agree, Yariv. I think like the Flyers, I mean, they'll look to be creative. We've seen Briere not be afraid to make yeah, it's a good idea. And I think they won't be afraid to execute on a trade if it makes sense, right? And I think to your point, their winger depth is the strongest aspect of their roster.
Prospects too,
exactly.
Right?
So they're going to probably, if they are making a trade, I would expect them to draw from that winger depth to try to bolster some of the center depth here. It just makes sense from how you're building the roster. So we'll see what happens. Like there's no guarantee, okay, they got Michkov, now they're getting a center for sure this offseason or anything like that. But I think it definitely probably opens the front office more to the idea because it is beneficial to them, right? The longer you have, let's say you have Michkov playing with a guy that you expect to be his long-term center partner, the more they can develop chemistry, the more they can develop together and learn to play with each other. So it's probably definitely something that's top of mind for the Flyers organization, though I don't think they're going to rush into it by any means necessary. I think if the right deal does entice them, they'll be all over it, but I don't think they're going to be like, okay, we got to trade all these assets right away or anything like that.
Right. They're not going to be running like, oh my God, Michkov needs somebody to play with. I don't think they look at the roster that way.
I think Couturier, to your point,
I think he's going to be
a great guy to play with him to start his career off. Just in
Couturier and TK, I think would be ideal. To play with.
I agree, and I think Couturier specifically, like if you're looking for a guy that Michkov can look at, okay, how do I play defense responsibly in my own end at the NHL level? That's a great role model for him. To play alongside with, and it's a great guy that will help take some of the defensive pressure off of Michkov as well, right?
The way I kind of see it right now, again, this is a way too early prediction. But just based off of the lines last year and how I can see it insert of Michkov, just top my head, I mean, why not have a Michkov who is a lefty? I mean, you could potentially play him on the left, but you can alternate wings with Michkov and TK and Couturier. There's your top line, assuming Coots is good to go, and I think he will be. Then your second line is going to be what we saw during the season, which was Tippett, Frost, Forrester. Your third line will be Farabee, Lawton, Brink, right? And then your fourth line, Cates, Paling, and Hathaway.
Which was a great line, actually.
Exactly. And all of a sudden, like, okay, what are you desperately really looking for when you break down the lineup like that? Like, yes, could you improve elements? Of course. This team is not built to win a Stanley Cup. Are there moves the Flyers could make that it could excite me? Of course. And I would be open to them. But like I see people immediately like, oh, Michkov here means Farabee's gone. Oh, Michkov's here means we have to go trade. I just don't think the Flyers are operating in that way. And even a guy, and we can start dipping into our next topic and like kind of the draft a little bit, and we'll end in that segment here because we're going pretty long. A guy like Berkey Catton's out there, right, and is available. Or even let's say Caden Lindstrom, who probably will not fall to us, but I'm just going to use him as an example because he's a center. These guys are centers, and I love Berkey Catton. I would love to have him on this team. Let's say the Flyers draft him. He's not ready this year. He might not even be ready next year to play center in the NHL. Exactly. Maybe, but does it mean he can even keep up with Michkov, who's a more elite talent than this guy at the same age? Like maybe he can, but I'm not 100% sure that that's the case. And I don't think the Flyers are going to be walking in the situation being like, oh, we just drafted the guy. Now, having said that, there have been rumors going heavy with the Flyers talking to the Ottawa Senators, and what is rumored, and we don't know if this is 100% true, but it's just rumored that the Flyers could be looking to make their way up to 7. Now, one guy who is available up here, who is an elite talent, who has been compared to Michkov, I've heard people say he's better than Michkov. I don't buy that for a fucking second, considering this guy hasn't even played against men. And Michkov dominated that league, didn't even play in that league for what, 2.5 years, didn't play in the MHL, where Demidov has been playing there this year. But Ivan Demidov is it. I do not diminish his talent, right? Like, he is an exceptional prospect. I think everybody should be excited about him. He has very high end playmaking skills, very, very dynamic in the way that he plays. I look at the situation with Michkov, though, having said that, with Michkov coming over here, I think maybe the fear of Demidov having issues coming over probably diminish. But we talked about it earlier. These Russian players, similar to NCAA players, they have kind of a leverage, right? Like, just because you draft them doesn't mean they have to come over. I don't think things should be that way. I'll make it very clear. I think NHL teams, I think there should be an honor there. And I think it should be like, hey, whoever drafts you come over. There should be consequences.
An honor agreement in a sense.
Right,
Yeah.
right. But even like, you shouldn't be able to dictate who can draft you, right? Like, people might like that, but I don't like that, because it's supposed to be like, this is a traditional thing. Like, you're putting teams in really bad situations. And I don't know. I'm not a fan of it. There has to be some kind of consequence for not wanting to. But as things stand today, KHL players have leverage here. There's a reason Michkov ended up as a Flyer. I mean, these teams are not stupid. The reality is Michkov wanted to be a Flyer, so he ended up going to the Flyers, right? Like, worse players were taken ahead of him because they knew he wouldn't come over in the same enthusiasm that he would to the Flyers. A guy like Ivan Demidov, who they were teammates within Ska's organization, I do wonder if the Flyers are trying to move up for two reasons. One, to try to get the guy they want, which we have no idea who that is. Or I guess maybe three, potentially a better prospect than they could at 12, right? Kind of a guarantee that they get the guy that they want. But the other option is, does a guy like Demidov, and again, this pure speculation, I have no goddamn idea, is he interested in following his counterpart to Philadelphia? And did they potentially talk about something like this on their own, to be like, it would be pretty awesome to play together in the United States together, where we both speak Russian and we're the two elite Russian prospects in the world right now. And could we come over and kind of build a Russian identity inside of the Flyers, and we'll be the backbone of their offense for the next, kind of like a Malkin Crosby, only from the same country. Is there an opportunity there for Demidov to kind of control his own fate? I don't know if he wants to come to Philly. This is all speculation, but it is just interesting to think about how the Flyers, Michkov coming over here could be completely different, but are they trying to become more aggressive in the draft because of Michkov or Demidov, or maybe some other player that is available up there that they do kind of align with this overall vision? And that's where that's kind of coming from. If we're just aligning overall vision, yeah, wouldn't it be ideal, a guy like Demidov, who could also be converted to center, from what I understand of his game, from what I've seen, or at least play with Michkov and be the guy who sets him up. Even though Michkov kind of does it all, they both kind of do, to be honest with you. Just, Michkov is an elite goal scorer, more than Demidov from what I've seen. But, is there room for that? I don't know, Vasili. What do you think?
I think it's definitely an interesting question, because if you're the Flyers, why wouldn't you want to draft a guy like Demidov, such a talented forward? And then obviously the relationship is already there between Demidov and Michkov, just from their time with Ska. And I'm sure there's some chemistry too, just for playing together in preseasons and things like that, and training camp. So it would be really enticing. Like you said, you draft essentially the top two Russian prospects in all of hockey, if you were to secure Demidov potentially. One caveat, and one thing I heard you mention that I think is spot on, with Michkov coming over early, I do think this might, put this idea in the minds of teams that, hey, like, look at Michkov come over so early.
What's
Demidov,
the fear?
yeah, what's the fear?
As long as he wants
gonna
to play here.
Exactly, right? So unless it's some sort of situation where, like, oh, he doesn't want to play for any of these teams, only wants to play for the Flyers or something. But I don't think Demidov's going to drop
I don't think so
like
either.
Michkov is. Though anything can happen because there were
I
rumors
think he's
swirling
going
that.
to,
Yeah, there
personally.
were rumors swirling that he might drop, right? Kind of leading up into this week. So who really knows what's going to happen? Some teams might have him lower on their board, and their scouts might like other players. It's completely possible. I just think from what I've seen of Demidov, he's going to go in the top 5. So for the Flyers to trade into the top 5, going to probably be very expensive. Probably not something they would be willing to trade into based on, okay, number 12, you're in a spot where there's just so many guys that could fall to you. Why, you're in a pretty
Just
good
let it play
position.
out.
Exactly, because think about all the guys we've talked about over the last few weeks. There's a handful of names. So you're going to get one of them. You're going to get a good player for sure.
Yes.
So why waste extra assets to, move up unless 100% you're going to get that guy. So I think that's why we don't see any deal made with Ottawa yet for that pick potentially.
I don't think we will, personally.
Or
I don't
for
think it will
even
happen.
or for even any pick, right? Because like I think for the Flyers, if they're going to move up on draft day, it will be on draft day because you're not going to know how that draft board shakes out until you get there, until it actually happens. So why would you waste the assets and be like, oh, we're going to get this pick and we're going to get this guy, and Demidov or whoever they were targeting might not even be there at that point at 7, or let's say even if they're going to get 6 or number 5 or who knows, right?
Yeah.
So I think for them, it would be something they'd be interested in. I just don't know if Demidov would be available, but I do think just in terms of like who the Flyers might draft in the first round, with Michkov coming over earlier, it might lean them maybe towards a center option versus like a defense or something. Who knows? But we'll see, right? Like I think it really
Ideally,
depends.
they want a center,
Yeah,
right? But
exactly. I
might
think
not
it just
pan
de-
out that way.
I just think it depends on who's there when they potentially draft, right? Obviously, if you move to 7, the chances of a guy you might like is being there is higher, right? Like the higher you are in the draft, the higher chance that guy's going to be there for you to
Sure.
draft. So
Yeah.
I think it depends on who's available for the Flyers, who is on their board, and who they are kind of leaning towards. But I think just for their overall draft strategy, being at 12 is, at least in this draft, and kind of how many guys are kind of projected around that 7 to 12 range. And it's kind of all different, right? Like we heard Danny Briere mention in his press conference, after 5, it's wide open. Everybody has everybody different.
I have a
So
feeling Jet Luchenko is going to go high. Sorry, go ahead.
it could be, but I think like with them at 12, they're in a good position to kind of fall into a really talented player, no matter who gets picked ahead of 12 here.
Yeah, and I've seen like Beckett Seneca at 8, like recently. Like I just seen so many variations, and I don't know if they're accurate at all. But I think to that point, like you don't really know who's going to be available at 12. Why not just let it roll? Get the best players you can, and then make deals afterwards. Like
Yeah, exactly.
maybe you drafted a guy that Anaheim really wants. Maybe you drafted a guy who Anaheim really wants with your second pick, and you move that guy in a combination with somebody for maybe it's
For
Frost in
Zegras,
that
yeah.
second pick for Zegras, like because you got the guy they really want, or whoever, maybe Cole Perfetti is on his way out. And and Winnipeg, or who does Perfetti play for? I'm sorry,
Winnipeg, yeah.
yeah, Winnipeg. Yeah, maybe they really like him, right? And they're like, well, we get the guy that we really wanted to take who wasn't available to us, or we took another guy and we had them both rated really high. And we get him, and then Morgan Frost, which would be supplementary, like
There's a lot of options.
we just don't know. And I think a lot of people are kind of jumping to like making all these moves in kind of combination with Michkov, but I think let us see what kind of look, if Michkov really is what we hope he is, he doesn't need anyone. Like Connor Bedard did not have elite talent around him to stick out, and he is very much a work in progress. Like he is not good defensively.
He made these guys, these types of players like a Bedard, like a Michkov, they make the players around them better, right?
Right, exactly. So why don't we wait to see what happens? Like this is completely theoretical. I'm not saying this is going to happen. What happens if Morgan Frost plays with Matvei Michkov and all of a sudden puts up 70 plus points in the league?
It's definitely possible. I mean, he was close to putting up 50 points in the past 2 seasons here
without an elite.
Yeah, if you play with a player of that type of talent, who knows how it's going to transform their game. So it's definitely possible. I just think, like you said, with Michkov coming over, it just opens up a ton of possibilities. Whether it come to moves the Flyers are to make, or moves the Flyers are going to make, or like what's going to actually happen with the team internally and how that's going to affect the other players. It's definitely a huge positive in general, right? Like I think the Flyers are ecstatic to have Michkov come over. Obviously, the Flyers fans are ecstatic to have him come over, and it's just going to be something that's going to benefit the organization moving ahead. Obviously,
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And again, we're just thrilled about Mitch Cobb. I think just be excited about the fact that he's coming over. Don't jump to all this other stuff that needs to happen to adjust to him. If he is the player we hope that he is, he will have a big impact on this particular roster that he has in front. They only need to make a little bit of room because they have too many numbers, too many players at the NHL level right now. So someone has to go. And I don't think they're going to be jumping to move their 24-year-old only top six left winger at this point. I don't know where this really came from. Again, I'm hearing that him and Torella don't like each other. I don't believe that for a snot second. I don't believe any of that because I heard that about Morgan Frost and somehow that didn't. I think people love drama. They love to make stuff up from far away. They love to pick up on little things and to create narratives around it that usually surround doom and gloom. And I don't think that way. So until I see actual evidence where the third highest point scorer on this team really does one out the door, I can't repeat that stuff because I don't know where it's coming from. And I don't like rumors in general. And look how we reacted to Michkov stuff. When it's a real rumor, I notice. Right, like the Michkov
there's
rumors
smoke, there's fire, right?
Right, but that was real smoke.
Exactly.
That wasn't
Multiple
Torella
reports
hates
over weeks.
Farabee.
So.
Yeah, this was like people saying stuff publicly in high positions, like the chairman of the team from SCA saying a deal will be done by the end of June.
Obviously, he would know in his position, right?
That's a real rumor. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, of course. So I think like it's obviously an exciting time for Michkov to be coming over. There's a ton of things here that with Michkov coming over that might affect the Flyers, like whether it be their strategy going forward, what's going to happen in the draft. So I think just really this news is capping off a very exciting offseason to come because I think nobody really is aware of what might occur going forward. Nobody even knew Michkov would come over this early, right?
Yeah.
It only just came, this news kind of just came up in the last month here and it's actually happened. So I think it's just going to be a wait and see, to your point, Yariv, especially with all the rumors. To see what happens. Like, will that Ottawa trade go through? Who knows? There's rumors of Farabee getting traded. Who knows? There's rumors of, the Flyers going after Zegras and other types of players. Who knows? I think at this point, it's all hearsay and it's all kind of things that are leading into silly season, right? We're kind of getting to that time of year where there's tons of rumors, tons of stuff to talk about. It's great for our show, obviously, great topics to kind of get into. But I think the main aspect and the main thing is the Flyers have, potential elite generational talent coming to the team as early as next season. That's obviously going to add a bunch of hype around the team in general, and it's going to add to their roster in general. So it's something to be excited for. And it's just interesting to see now what's going to happen throughout the rest of the offseason because they have such a major part of their team. How are they going to kind of supplement him and supplement that talent, not even this offseason, but down the line, right? Because it's all connected. So.
Yeah, well said. And I think that we can end it on that. I do want to make an announcement here before we end. You will see starting next week, Vasili will be traveling to the draft. So Jamie will be doing the episode with me next week. And I think we'll be recording Tuesday night, as per usual schedule. But we have built a new partnership with Sport Spider. Sorry, let me say that correctly. You will start seeing them around. I will be mentioning them, but we are happy to start working with them. They are an aggregating site. They reached out to us about making us, kind of their go-to Philadelphia Flyers coverage. They're a fan of the show. So you will hear more about that in the weeks coming forward. And also, we have to say we hit 1,000 subscribers. Finally, we have surpassed that already as we're recording this. You guys are amazing. Thank you all so much. I'm so proud to be a Flyers fan. You know, Vasili and I are over the moon about it. We've been kind of chasing this for a while. You know, I was far away from it when Vasili joined as my co-host, you know, and big part of the site. And, you know, we finally did it. So, thank you all. Like, it's been amazing. We didn't do any sponsorship because it's like a breaking episode thing. And, I didn't want to even waste time with that. I just wanted to get right into Michkov stuff. And, again, we don't do this because of money. We do not make enough money off of this site to even do this for money. But we're just excited the momentum that we've created, and you guys have supported that. So thank you all so much. We hope you enjoyed this breakdown. We'll obviously have plenty more Michkov talk. And again, Vasili will be on the ground in Vegas. He will be covering things. He will have interviews. He'll be posting videos. He did a great job last year. And had some exclusive stuff on there. He'll do a lot more of that. I'll be covering it from home. Jamie will be covering from home. And then we'll have Steve Kornianos back on here after the draft. Vasili will be back. And we're going to do another one of those like 3-hour episodes, most likely, like at least 2-hour episodes, breaking down the draft, everything that happened. We will probably talk about Michkov again, just because Steve has seen Michkov play so much.
And knows so much. It'll be great to get his perspective on this.
Yes.
Also.
And this is a monumental offseason for the Flyers already. We are really working towards something special, and the new leadership has done a great job. Vasili, anything you want to add to what I just said?
Yeah, like just thanks to everybody for supporting us and getting us over that hump for 1,000. We've been grinding away, and we, notice like all the support, all the comments, everybody tuning in. So we appreciate that. And also, yeah, just keep an eye out. Next week, I'm going to be in Vegas. So I'm going to literally, like, every prospect the Flyers draft, I will be there. I'll have videos of the interviews with the prospects, videos of interviews with Danny Briere afterwards, Brent Flair as well. So I'll be bringing that to you. So follow me on Twitter at Flyer It Up, and you'll get to see all that stuff. And also, I'll have a Michkov article going up tomorrow as well in combination with this video. Just due to all the hype and just the discussions and everything kind of surrounding Michkov, I think it would only be appropriate to have something go out with this video as well. So we just thanks for everybody supporting us throughout the Flyer season, throughout the off season, and as the off season ramps up, we're gonna have even greater content for you, the great Flyers fans.
Yeah, and I am so goddamn pumped that Michkov is coming. Like,
oh, it's awesome. It's going to be great just to watch him play next season, right?
I will say this, and I'm going to toot our own horn a little bit here. As far as I know, we are the only podcast that said we thought Michkov was coming over early. Not a single person that I listened to, and I love Bill Meltzer. I respect the shit out of that guy. He said bank on 3 years. All of them said 3 years.
We said early. We didn't say early. This early, but
yeah, we didn't know it was going to be this early. But the only thing I said was I knew that every offseason the Flyers would be working to bring him over here, because that's what I would do.
And they were successful in it. So, yeah,
I can only give you the perspective of what I would do if I was GM. And if I was GM, I would be working on getting him out of there every offseason. And that's what the Flyers did. So, again, that's why we do things the way we do, is because we just play GM, right? We don't have sources like that. Sometimes we do. We don't really care about sources. We don't care. All the predictions we have, they're not based on sources. They're based on our intuition. And I'm proud to say that we did that. That was another thing that we called out early. If you've been listening for a long time, you know that we told you that there would be an effort. We don't know what's going to happen, but there would be an effort to bring this kid over here. And whatever the team said publicly, there was clearly a strong effort to bring him over here. Otherwise, he wouldn't be coming over here. Anything else you want to add?
Perfect way to end, I think. Great
Perfect.
Episode, man.
All right, yeah, we went way over the amount, but I kind of knew that was going to happen. This was supposed to be like a 40-minute thing, and we've gone over an hour. So again, thank you all so much for listening. Again, follow us on Spotify and iTunes. Please like and subscribe. I didn't even say that stuff to begin with. Shout out to our sponsor, Jim Steaks. Summit Public Adjusters. Again, Sports Spider will be announcing more of that moving forward. You'll hear that in next week's episode and so on. Yeah, thank you, Vasili. You were the fucking man.
You too, brother.
Yeah, and I love you guys. We love you guys. And remember, always stay